L'kuta Sikha is Chelek Yudzayin Metzora Beis Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Binyamin Ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman, a fascinating Rashi Sikha with a beautiful Hira at the end. It's on the topic of Tumah and Tara, so it might be a little bit complicated, but we're going to analyze this Rashi and come out with a beautiful and clear understanding of Rashi that seems impossible as you go in, but seems so simple as you come out. So, let's begin. In Pasuk Ukli Cheres Asher Yiga B'Hazov Yishaver V'Chol Kli Eitz Yishatef B'Mayim, the Pasuk says that a Kli Cheres that is touched by a Zov should be broken, and if it's a wooden keli, wooden vessel, it should be immersed in the water. There's various different types of tumah and various different types of vessels or things that are touched by the tumah, affected by the tumah, with different halachas. So, for example, there's tumas mes, there's tumas sheretz, there is tumas nida, tumas zav or zava, etc., etc. So there are various different tumas, with each one has its own set of halachas. Then there's various different things that could be touched or affected by tumah. For example, if it's a kli cheres, as we'll see later in the sikha, a kli cheres, on the one hand, it only becomes tamei if something goes inside of it, not by being touched. So if you touch a kli cheres on the outside of it, it doesn't become tamei. If you touch the kli cheres on the inside, it becomes tamei, not because of the touch, but because it went into the avir, into the air, the atmosphere of the vessel. Another thing is that a kli cheres cannot become tahir. The only way to become tahir is by breaking it. So the pasuk over here says that a kli cheres that was touched by a zov, so it's the tumah zov is touching the kli cheres, it becomes tamei and it has to be broken. But if it's a wooden keli, then you could put it into the mikveh and it becomes tahir. So Rashi quotes these words: the kli cheres that is touched by the zav, I would think that it's even if it was touched on the outside. Now the pasuk is telling me that if a zav touches a kli cheres from the outside of the keli, it becomes tamei. And the Teras Kenim speaks about this. To tell us that one might have thought that a kli cheres could touch a keli from the outside and it would become tamei. Keep on reading in that Teras Kenim until the words what kind of touch is there that affects the entire vessel? One must say it's if it gets moved. So Rashi is saying that the kli cheres that is touched by a zav does not become tamei, because a kli cheres does not become tamei through touch. But what does it mean? Asher yiga boy, kli cheres that is touched by the zav, it becomes tamei. It means if it was moved, and here moves, even if he didn't touch it, even if he pushed it with something else, but the kli cheres that was moved by a zav becomes tamei and needs to be broken. Davon verstehen, so now we have to understand this Rashi. Was ist das schwer im Psudischal Mikra? Was zu lieb dem, ist Rashi mefarisch die Werte Yiga bei Ledroshus Chazal und Teras Kenim, und nicht das Yiga bei Iskipshute. Das meint Negier, und jeder Negier viel mehr Acherov. What is bothering, what is difficult, what's the question on the Psudischal Mikra, that because of that Rashi feels compelled to teach the pasuk according to a drasha of Chazal, that Yiga means to move, and not translated simply that yiga means to touch, any touch, that any type of touch, even if it was on the outside of the vessel, affects the tumah of the vessel of the keli. What causes Rashi to change from the simple meaning that it means touch to a drasha that it means move? Is the asbari in them? So here is the explanation. We can't say that yiga boy means literal touch. We bought as much in free and Parsha Shmini, but too much sheretz. Aruis gelernt, Virashe zog dort, as enkli cheres mit Tami Elam Aviroi. We already in Parsha Shmini, when the Torah was talking about tumas sheretz, we already learned, as Rashi taught us, that a kli cheres could only be metame, could only become tamei, only if something tamei goes in its atmosphere, in its inside. Und der River kämen schon dann Teitschen, also kli cheres, as a yiga boy, soll tamei werden durch eine Gia mecheres. So we can't translate here the word yiga means touch, that a kli cheres becomes tamei through touch, because we already learned in Parsha Shmini that it doesn't work like that. So in other words, when we read the pasuk of klicheres asher yigabai, the first thing that comes to mind is that it can't mean negia. It can't mean touch. But now that I start looking at it, I think maybe we could differentiate between tuma sheretz and tuma zov. Davke dorten ba tuma sheretz satuma kala. Maybe tuma sheretz, which is a lighter, a less stringent tuma, so it cannot be metame klicheres unless it goes into the inside. But tuma zav is a tuma chamura, but tuma zav, which is a more stringent tuma, sees metame and mishkav u'mayshav. Tuma zav is metame. It's called mishkav u'mayshav. Sometimes it's called tumas midras, which is any tuma, any action that places weight on this. For example, if you sit on something, if you lay on something, if you step on something, if you hang from it, anything that puts weight, lean on it, onto this thing could become tamei, and that works in the case of a zav. A zav is metame b'mishkav u'mayshav, not a sheretz, not tumas mes. So therefore, you could say tuma zav has a stringency that is metame b'mishkav u'mayshav, which doesn't apply to tuma sheretz. So maybe it is more stringent also with regards to the klicheres, and cannot klicheres yet and then say that maybe a zav could make the klicheres tamei by touching it on the outside. And then you could tie yiga kipsutai. The yiga means literally touch. So this is what a person could think. Right away, you're not accepting yiga by right away, because you know that a klicheres is not metame through touch. But then you think to yourself, 1 second, maybe that's just tuma sheretz and not tuma zav. And then maybe we could say yiga means to touch. Is the river? It's therefore, in order to address that we should not accept this differentiation between tuma sheretz and tuma zav, which we want to do, because if we do accept this differentiation, then yiga could be translated literally touch. But that's not the pshat. Is Rashi maitik from pasuk? Need not divert the velchas mefarish yiga boy. Rashi quotes in the pasuk not just the words which he's actually explaining. He brings down the words that will actually emphasize this differentiation. Uklicheres asher yiga boy azov. That we're talking about a zav. We're talking about a klicheres, and maybe because it's a zav, the zav could be metame the klicheres through touching. Unzakt yachal afilu naga b'yamechedav. And says maybe a person would think that maybe because there's a tuma zav, it could be metame from the outside through touch, and it's different than sheretz. And then Rashi says, etc., as it is stated in Teras Kernim. What is the Hemshech in Teras Kernim is? What does it actually say in Teras Kernim? The dinu. Uma imeis hachamor loitim ekliches mechairav madach tumas meis, which is a more stringent tuma, cannot be metama klicheres on the outside. Hazav akal ein edin shlei tama klicheres mechairav. For sure, a zav cannot be metama mechairav. So you thought maybe yiga means touching. It can't mean, because we have a kal v'chaymer. Madach tumas meis is not metama through touch on a klicheres. For sure, tumas zav is not metama through touch on a klicheres. So then he says, look. He refutes the kal v'chaymer. Maybe a mess is considered less stringent, because a mess is not metama b'mishkav u'mayshav, and therefore it's also not metama klicheres me'acherav. But a zav, which is metama b'mishkav u'mayshav, maybe it could be metame a klicheres me'acherav as well. Talmud Leimar continues the Teres Kehanim Asher Yiga Boy. Pasuk says Asher Yiga Boy. Ulahal Leimar Asher Tevushal Boy. Later in Parashas Lahal is not. Usually Lahal means later. Here Lahal means Parshas Tzav. It says Asher Tevushal Boy, it'll be cooked in it. Ma Boy Amar La'alon Me'avire, when it says Tevushal Boy, it means inside, because you're cooking in it, so it obviously means that which is being inside. Avkam Me'avire, also here it means that it's only Me'avire. Yiga Boy, that a klicheres could only be metame, something that's on the inside of it and not on the outside of it. So then the question is raised, If klicheres cannot become tummy through touching on the outside, what does it mean the word zigaba in our pasuk? So here Rashi actually brings the end of the Teras Kehanim. What type of touch is it that would affect the entire vessel, we conclude that it means moving it. So let's just review what happened over here. We saw the pasuk says Yigabay. We said the thing Yigabay doesn't mean touch, because the klicheres is not a time through touch. Then we started saying, but it says Yigabay. Maybe this is different. Maybe Zav is different than Sheretz. And it could be Metame Me'avirei. And it could be Metame through Negia. I'm sorry. So the Rashi comes and says, Yachal, you might think that it's even through touch. Look at the Teres Kehanim. The Teres Kehanim says, first it tries a Kal V'chomer, which it refutes. Then it comes up with a Gzeir Shavah that says, bye. That teaches me that Klicheres is only Metame Me'avirei, only from the inside. It can't be from the outside. So then what does it mean, Yigaboy? It means moving it. So in Siv Beis, we're going to ask the question, why does Rashi quote part of the Teres Kehanim and not the other part? Either he should have sent us, say, look in the Teres Kehanim and rely on us that we will learn the whole Teres Kehanim, or if there's more that we have to know than what he quotes, quote more of it. That's going to be the discussion in Siv Beis. Either Rashi should have quoted the entire Teres Kehanim, including the proof that Yigabay does not mean from the outside through touch, which is the Gzeir Shavah of boy. And if Rashi is relying on us that we're going to look it up ourselves, then Rashi did not have to quote the end of the Teres Kehanim, where he says that the touch means the moving it. We could have concluded his comment here with the words as it is stated in Teres Kehanim, and then we would go learn the Teres Kehanim. We have a similar thing in Parashas Vayikra. There's a pasuk where it says, Osham hu, Oshoim, Osham, La Hashem. So Rashi says, it's an extra pasuk because already in the previous pasuk, it already told us that he has to bring a carbon asham. So he says, this is already addressed, expounded upon in Teres Kehanim. Teres Kehanim, it says that this pasuk is including an asham tali, an asham shivcha charufa, that they also have to be an ayil that's worth 2 sloim. Whatever. The point is that Rashi says nothing other than go look in Teres Kehanim. So the question is, why doesn't Rashi do the same thing over here? Say he is with Teres Kehanim. And if Rashi feels that he does that can't trust us, that we're going to look it up, and he has to tell it to us, then give us everything. Give us the reason why how we know that a klicheres is not mitame through negia me'achedav, through touching it on the outside, and then what Yigabay means. The past is something you can't find it. So simply we could answer. Das was Rashi bringt dem Simei Magoy is weil der mit is gegeben der Zeit von Yigabay. Hesed. And maybe the reason that Rashi quotes the second part, the end of the Teres Kehanim, is because that's the actual translation of the word Yigabay. Yigabay means to touch it, to move it. But the first part of the Teres Kehanim, which is just the proof that klicheres could not be metame from the outside, but it not necessarily telling us what it means here. The Rabbi bringt es nicht. The Rashi does not feel it necessary to bring it down, to spell it out, and he relies on us that we'll open up the Teres Kehanim and we'll look it up. So in other words, we're suggesting that Rashi is giving us the part of the Teres Kehanim that's the translation of the words, but not the lead up to it, why it can't mean any other translation. But that's difficult to say. But it's been spoken many times that whatever is necessary for the understanding of Suda Shal Mikra, the Rashi will bring it for the Ben Chamish Shal Mikra in a clear and an explicit way. And since simply Yigabay can mean touching it from the outside, Rashi has to explain to us why it shouldn't be Yigabay. and not to rely on the reference to Teres Kehanim. Ubifrat, as the Teres Kehanim lent us up an Gzeira Shava, especially since the Teres Kehanim is using Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava is not simple understanding of the Psukim. Gzeira Shava is taking two words, boy, and making a comparison. It's not simply understood in the Pasuk. A Ben Chomish Lamikra that reads the Pasuk, sees Asher boy, won't see the Siraya clearly. You'll tell him, boy, fine. But it's not really Pashtus Aksuvim. So, in other words, Rashi doesn't just translate. Rashi has to give us everything that we need to know from Pshuto Shel Mikra. If you're changing your mind, not your mind, if you're changing the Pashtus, that Yigabai does not mean touch, you have to tell the Mechamis Mikra why it shouldn't mean touch. And Rashi doesn't do that. So to say that Rashi is just picking the parts of the Teres Kehanim that are relevant to the Taich and not relevant to the lead up to the Taich doesn't work, because the Mechamis Mikra is going to want to know, why aren't you saying Yigabai means Negiya Me'acherav? Musmazagin with that from Moshe as late to the Shal Mikra is Diraya. So that we have to say that therefore not only Teras Kehanim, even in Pshuto Shel Mikra, the Raya that it cannot mean Negiya Me'acherav, that Yigabai does not mean Negiya, because a Klicheres does not become Tameh, even from a Zov, on the out, by touching it on the outside, is nit from the Gzeira Shava boy. Was wird nicht gebracht in Pirish Rashi. It's not from the Gzeira Shava, which is why Rashi doesn't bring it. Nor from the Werte was Rashi is mighty beferish from Teras Kehanim. In the words that Rashi actually brings from the Teras Kehanim, that is where we can see that a Klicheres is not metame from the outside, even by a Zov. And the fact that Rashi references the Teres Kehanim, he does not the taste of Raya Ubir. It's only an extra Raya, extra explanation, as will be explained later on. But we're not basing it on the Teres Kehanim. Because we asked the question, why does Rashi not spell out the Teres Kehanim? The answer is because the Teres Kehanim is not Pshuto Shel Mikra. Everything that we need to know, we know from Pshuto Shel Mikra. We can use the Teres Kehanim as an extra Raya. And this is why Rashi suffices with a remez, with a hint, as it says in Teres Kehanim, because that part is not part of Pshuto Shel Mikra. It's not necessary to understand this pasuk. We can understand the pasuk without the Teres Kehanim. The very words that Rashi brings in his Pirush, that's enough for us to understand why it cannot be Negiya Me'acherav. Why Yigabai cannot mean touch, because a Klicheres is not metama on the outside, even by a Zov. Question that we have now, going into Seif Gimel, is how do we know? How does Rashi know from Pshuto Shel Mikra that a Klicheres is not metame through Negiya? It does not become tummy through touching, even by a Zov, where it says the words Asher Yigabai. So that's what we're going to do in Seif Gimel. We're going to try to find an explanation. How does Rashi know that a Klicheres is only metame me'aviroi, only metame on the inside and not on the outside, even by a Tumazov? And what we're going to do in Seif Gimel is we're going to try to learn it out of Tumas Meis. We're going to say, just like Tumas Meis is metame or by a Klicheres only me'aviroi, only from the inside of the Keli, so to by Tumazov, it's only metame me'aviroi. Seemingly we could say, as we learn it's not from Tumas Meis. We're learning Tumazov from Tumas Meis. Tumazav is also a very stringent Tumah. Von deswegen is es nicht metame Klicheres me'acherav, but nevertheless, it cannot be metame Klicheres by touching it from the outside. As we will learn later in Parshas Chukas with regards to Tumas Meis, that it is only metame on the inside of the Klicheres. Versteht therefore, as eich hazov, was is nicht as a chomer v'meis. They will understand from this that also the Tumazav, which is not as stringent as Tumas Meis, is nicht metame Klicheres me'acherav, would not be metame a Klicheres from the outside. So the cheder is very simple. In Pshuto Shel Mikra, in Parshas Chukas, we know that a Tomei Meis is not metame Klicheres me'acherav, and we can apply that limud to here. To Zav, that also Tumazav, which is not even as Chamor as Tumas Meis, also is not metame from the outside through touch. Und das ist Kavanas Rashi in the Metzayin and Teres Kenim. And if we follow this reasoning, this would be Rashi's intent when he references the Teres Kenim. It may not Gzeira Shava Boy Boy. It's not referring to the Gzeira Shava Boy Boy, which we already said previously is not Pashtas Aksuvim. And if Rashi meant the Boy Boy, he would have included it in the Rashi itself. No, dem Kal V'chemer was being tichtarten. Rashi, by referencing the Teres Kenim, is referring to the Kal V'chemer. Umay Meisa Chamor Leitin Klicheres Me'acherav. Mes, which is a more stringent tuma, is not metama the klicheres on the outside. Hazav akal in addition to metama klicheres me'acherav. And for sure the zav, which is a lesser stringency of tuma, for sure it cannot be metama klicheres me'acherav. But kal v'chemer is a svara psuta shel mikra, and this is a kal v'chemer. A kal v'chemer is logic. Logic is psuta shel mikra. Gzeira shava is acceptance. Boy. Doesn't necessarily have to make sense. But a kal v'chemer is using logic. So it's psuta shel mikra. So therefore, Rashi says, look at the Teres Kenim. You'll see the Kal V'chemer, and it'll make sense to you. When Agam is the Teres Kenim, frekt up the Kal V'chemer, and even though, as we saw before, the Teres Kenim refutes the Kal V'chemer. That by a zav there's a stringency that doesn't exist by mes. The fact that a zav is metame mishkav u'moishav meintis nora shkulimim. So that would only mean that the two zav and tumas mes are equal. That each has a stringency that the other one doesn't have. So in Psuta Shel Mikra, it makes them equal. In halacha, not necessarily, but in Psuta Shel Mikra, they're both equal. This one has a chumrah, this one has a chumrah, and if they're equal, they could be compared to each other. Also, with regards to the fact that a klicheres does not become tummy by touching it on the outside. So l'cheira, we could say that Rashi is learning tumas zav from tumas meis. That the yigaboy cannot mean touching because tumas zav does not metama klicheres on the outside. Und das was Rashi and shines to Teres Kenim. This is a parenthetical addition. If you're going to ask, why does Rashi send us to Teres Kenim? Unitzum pasuk psulis mikra parshas chukas. Why don't we go straight to chukas? If you're learning tumas zav from tumas meis, then Rashi could have said k'di isa or k'meisha kasov in parshas chukas. What does it say in Parshas Chukas? The pasuk says, "V'chol kli pasuach asher ein samid pasil alav tamehu." An open keli doesn't have a sealed cover is tamei. So Rashi says, what does it mean? It doesn't have a sealed cover because if it's covered, it cannot become tamei because it only becomes tamei if something goes on the inside. So if the kli is sealed and nothing can get in, then it can't become tamei. And from this Rashi derives, or Chazal derive, and Rashi explains it that klicheres is only metame me'aviroi by tumas mes. So why couldn't Rashi reference that and instead he references Teres Kenim? So he says for two simple reasons. Number one, because it's a more lengthy proof. It's not clear, it's not for sure that the Menchamish Mikra will understand it well. In Teres Kenim, is the limud beferish ubefirut. Teres Kenim is spelled out very well. It's a kal v'chemer. Umad is this, a kal v'chemer this. So it's spelled out much better. It's easier for the Menchamish to understand. So it's shorter and it's clearer. So this is our suggestion. This is the suggestion of Seiv Gimel. Maybe Rashi is learning klicheres by Zov from klicheres by Tamei Meis, and it's moving by Pashtos. Just like by Tamei Meis, it's only Metame Me'aviroi and not through Negia. Also, by Tumah Zov, it's also not Metame Negia. As is Aber Nitu is gehalten. However, we must say that this is not a legitimate explanation. Weil Levad says, was es bleibt nicht glattig. Was schreibt Rashi nicht hechlich beferisch. Besides the fact that it doesn't answer the question why Rashi doesn't spell it out, the same question we asked in Tziv Beis on Rashi why he doesn't spell out the Teres Kenim, could ask the same thing. He should have said, Yochel afilu negia me'acherav. Look in Parshas Chukas or look in Teres Kenim. Well, you'll see that a Tamei Meis is not Matama Benegia, Taba Klicheres through Negia Me'acherav, and therefore it can't be by Tumah Zav either. Rashi doesn't say that. So that question never got answered. Is Neisif Lazeh. In addition to that, we have another explanation, which is brilliant, but Medaf Halten Cup. A tummy mace is dachnit metama beheset. A tummy mace is not metama through moving. In other words, if the tumas mace moves a keli without touching it, it does not become tummy. The keli does not become tummy. Bring to number 10 that the Gemara in Shabbos says, there's no other tuma besides for tuma zov that is metama beheset through moving without touching it. So now I'm going to share it outside, and then we'll go back into the pnim. If you follow the reasoning of this Rashi starts in saying, I would think that it's metame even from the outside through touching it. He says, no, you can't say that. Why not? Because tumas mes is not metame b'negia by a klicheres. So therefore, also tumas zav is not metame b'negia by klicheres. So then in that case, what does it mean asher yigabay? Asher yigabay must mean moving it. Hesed. So now, that would mean that Zov has a chumre over Tumas Meis. Even though we said Shkulim Heim, or even though there's a Kal V'chemer from Zov, from Meis HaChamor to Zov HaKal, nevertheless, Zov has a chumre over Tomei Meis. That is B'tameh B'Hesed. So if you're creating a chumre by Zov over Tumas Meis, why can't that chumre be Negia? Why can't you say that Al Pi Seichel, Al Pi Havona, it's Taka, not B'tameh b'negia, but the chiddush of Ayasha Yigabai is that it's B'tameh b'negia, me'achayrav. The whole reason we didn't want to do that is because we want to compare Tumas Meis and Tumas Zav. We can't, because Tumas Zav is anyways getting a chumrah. If not the chumrah of negia me'achayrav, it's the chumrah of hesed. So what did you gain? V'adrabah. To say Yiga means touch is better, because if it's better in traditional mikra. Let's see inside. Is meken sagen as der pasuk as Yiga kum mechadish sein. As Zav is metame beheset. Was in the Torah tumas mes? If you're going to ultimately conclude that the pasuk as Yiga is saying a chiddush, that although by tumas mes it is not metame beheset, but by tumas Zav is metame beheset. Rabbi sagen as the chiddush in Yiga by stating them as Zav is metame klicheres me'achirav. Why can't you say that the chiddush of Yiga is that a Zav could be metame klicheres through touching it? Once there's a chumrah by Zav over Tomei Meis, why can't that chumrah be negia? Der Pirush darf sein Hadif. This Pirush is even better, because according to this Pirush, Yigabe could be translated literally touching. So once you've moved away from the comparison between Meis and Tumas Zav, why can't you say that Tumas Zav is Matam b'negia me'achayrav? Therefore, it can't be that the reason that Rashi knows that klicheres misbendat metama b'negia by a Zav is from Meis, because with Meis there's no proof. Even though we see that Meis is not metama b'negia me'achayrav, but we see that Zav is more chamor. There's a pasuk asher Yigabai. So we can't learn from Tomei Meis. So we're back to our original question: how does Rashi know? How does Rashi teach us that a klicheres is not metama b'negia me'achayrav by a Zav? Siv Dalet is going to give us another explanation, simpler one. Maybe Rashi's proof is from the end of this pasuk that if it's a wooden keli, it has to be immersed in the mikveh. So now, if Yigabai means hesed, it means to move it, is move on, the chiddush in the chol klietz. Then we understand the chiddush of the second half of the pasuk. As ba'azav is eich klietz tamei behesed. That by a zav, also a wooden keli becomes tamei through moving it, even without touching it. Ei baber Yigabai meint kipshutei. Afilu negia me'acherav. Und the pasuk is the mechades as a zav is metama klicheres through negia me'acherav. But if you're going to say that tumas that Yigabai means touching, and the chiddush of this pasuk is that a zav could be metama klicheres through touching it from the outside, that would leave a question: what is the chiddush in the chol klietz? What's the chiddush in the second half of the pasuk? As a klietz for tamei b'negia me'acherav, it's not chiddush. The fact that a klietz becomes tamei through touching it is not a chiddush. Many kalim become tummy through touching it. Klicheres, it would be a chiddush, because usually it's not metama b'negia. So there would be a chiddush that here it is metama b'negia. But then you would leave the second half of the pasuk without a chiddush. What is michal chiddush? Therefore, maybe possibly, Rashi is saying, the only way to understand the Chiddush of Kli Eitz is if you touch the first half of the pasuk, that it means moving. That if a Zav moves a Keli, a Kli Cheres, it has to be broken, because it's Tameh. And if a Zav moves a Kli Eitz, it has to go into the mikveh because it's Tameh. So if you say that Yigabay means Yasit, moving it, then the second half of the pasuk makes sense. So maybe this is how Rashi knows that we're not talking about Negiya Me'acherav, and we're talking about Hesed, because of the second half of the pasuk. But this question is, this explanation is also difficult to understand. Because if that's the case, Rashi would have included those words. If that's his hechrich, if Rashi's hechrich, Rashi's compelling proof is from the words v'chol klietz, Rashi would have included those words in the Dibra Maschil. Or at least hint to it with the word v'goymer, etc. When we bought the Rashi tut is nit, is der Raya as halt es nit verrecha chaziga b'metesset. Come on. This is a proof that Rashi is not learning from a Klietz. Either because he holds that this is not the Raya, that Yigabe means to move it, or that as the Raya Vaser Brengt is a better, or the Rashi has a better Raya than this. So we're back to our original question. What is the Raya that by a Zov, Klicheres is not Metame Benegia, not Metame through touching it on the outside, and therefore Yigabe means Hesed, means moving it. So we tried to say we learned from Tumas Meis. We said it can't be learned from Tumas Meis. We tried to say we learned from Ukliyetzus out of Amayim. We said we can't be from there. So we're back to our original question. How does Rashi know that a Klicheres is not Metame Benegia Me'acherav by Tumazov? Sifei. Wenn wir das verstehen, behaktem at mir. So we're going to introduce another question that is going to lead us to a very beautiful chiddush, and that is that sometimes a pasuk is written in the Torah, even though there's only one detail that is a chiddush that has not been said before. The Torah will repeat the entire pasuk just for one detail. And once we understand this nakuda, we'll understand what our pasuk is telling us, and how we know that Negiya Me'acherav is not Metama Klicheres Be'ezov. But to get there, we first have to introduce another question. So this pasuk that we've been talking about till now is pasuk Yud Beis. Pasuk Yud Aleph says, anything that the Zav touched, literally means his hands weren't washed. But as Rashi tells us, it means he hasn't been to the mikveh yet. Then anything that was touched by the Zav that had not been to the mikveh, he has to wash his clothes, he has to dip in the mikveh, and he becomes tamei. So the basic chiddush of this pasuk is that even though he finished his time, the Zav had to wait Sheva Nikim, even though he already waited out the time, but if he hasn't gone to the mikveh yet, he's still just as tamei, and therefore if he touches something, it has to wash his clothes, it has to go to the mikveh, etc. So the question is like this: that was pasuk Yud Aleph. If you look back in pasuk Zayin, it says, if someone touches the skin, the flesh of the Zav, then he has to wash his clothes, he has to go to the mikveh, and he's tamei till the end of the day. So the Chayr of pasuk Zayin and pasuk Yud Aleph are saying the same thing. Why does pasuk Yud Aleph have to be repeated? Und der Din wie Rashi's mefarish as kosmamos leitava metumasiv afilu pasuk mezeve v'safar shiva metami v'chulu. The fact that what I just mentioned, which was from Rashi, that this pasuk is telling us that even though he finished his counting of his days and he's just missing the mikveh, he's still metame. Maybe that's why the pasuk is telling it to us. It says no, it's Aleph came and it's up learning midat kol came from the Din by Yodis. First of all, you could learn it from the Din of Yodis, but mushab and tvila. So Yodis has to go to the mikveh. When I feel a nach tvila, even after she has gone to the mikveh, b'chol kedush leisiga, she can't touch any kedush, any kachim. Ve'ein shimsha ma'iriv l'tara at shkias hachama shel yemar boim shel mochar tovias kaparas ta'arasa, and she does not become tamei until the end of the day of the 40th day, which on the next day she's going to bring her kapara. So from the fact that we see by the Yildis that she has to, even after she goes to the mikveh, she cannot touch any kodesh until the end of the day. Then Kolsha came by the Zav, who hasn't gone to the mikveh, for sure he's still metami. Beis, so we have one thing, one raya. Beis v'ikir. More importantly, even if I couldn't learn it from Yildis, to live them darf die Torah nicht übergasen the ganzen pasuk. This is not a reason for the Torah to repeat an entire pasuk. Es soll gewen genug zu reinstellen die Wörter wie Yodel Lashat of Amayim in frier dicken pasuk when I gave him Sarazov. You could have added the words Yodel Lashat of Amayim in the previous pasuk. The pasuk Zion could have said when I gave him Sarazov, Yodel Lashat of Amayim. These words, the Yodel Lashat of Amayim, that tells me that he has to have gone to the mikveh. And that if he hasn't gone to the mikveh, he's still tamei, even though he waited out his days, could have been said in the previous pasuk. Could have merged the two psukim, and you would have saved the whole pasuk. So the question is, what is pasuk Yud Aleph? The pasuk that says that if someone touches a zav touches something before he goes to the mikveh, the person who gets touched has to wash his clothes, and he has to go to the mikveh. What is that pasuk teaching us? And to leave there to me. And because of this question, let him take the Gemara. Ados was state v'chalash yiga be'azav meitnin negiyad ner hesed. And therefore, the Gemara learns that this pasuk, not our pasuk, Yud Beis, the previous pasuk Yud Aleph, when it says over there v'chalash yiga be'azav, it means moving. That anything that the zav moves, because it can't be anything that the zav touches, because we already know that from pasuk Zayin. So the Gemara Taka changes the pshat of Yigabay and ready in Pasuk Yud Aleph and says it means anything the Zav moves. Rasha aber learned the Teres Kingdom. Rashi learns not like the Gemara. He learns the Teres Kingdom as erste Yiga von unser später the Pasuk meint has it. That our Yiga, our Pasuk, which is a later Pasuk, means moving. So then remains question. The question remains according to Rashi. To the Vosh state the Pasuk Chalash Yiga Be'azav. Umizetnet that Rashi is also bevarenen. What is the Pasuk Yud Aleph teaching me? And Rashi doesn't address it. Nor the beard in them. So what's the explanation? Eichle Psuti Shal Mikra can stay in a ganzer pasuk to live ein prat. Even according to Psuti Shal Mikra, it is possible, it is okay for there to be an entire pasuk written for one detail that is introduced in this pasuk. Mikol came from them was amal chazat über the Torah ganze parsha. Sometimes you find the Torah repeats a whole parsha for one detail that was introduced in the second round. As we see in Parashas Bereshis, the Torah chazat über nacham od sipur from Brias Adam v'Chava. The Torah repeats a second time the story of the creation of Adam and Chava. So the pratim was coming in the Tzeit and Sipur because of new details that are mentioned in the second story, and there are others. So therefore, it is possible for a pasuk to be written, even though most of the pasuk is not a chiddush. But if there's one detail that is introduced in this new pasuk, it's worth it to include the whole pasuk. Underfar is the psute shel mikra ken kashenit to the vaz dar stehen der pasuk v'chalash yiga be'azav. So now there's no question why this pasuk Yud Aleph is written. Well, does state to leave the mechidus when the tzuge geben averte v'yadol l'shat avamayim, because there's a chiddush in the words v'yadol l'shat avamayim was learned to us, which is teaching us v'Rashi's Messiah v'Pirushay nachtem v'yez mefarash tem pshat. After explaining that v'yadol l'shat avamayim means that it goes to the mikveh, Rashi says, why did it say v'yadav? So Rashi teaches she'ein beis astarim ton b'yasmayim. That hidden parts of the body, for example, the mouth, or if a person has flaps of, I don't know what the right word for it is, but fat and wrinkles, and the water doesn't get in under under that skin, then it's okay. Only a revealed limb, like hands, needs to get wet when a person goes to the mikveh. So there's a chiddush in the pasuk v'yadol l'shat avamayim, in this pasuk Yud Aleph, that when a person goes to the mikveh, it only has to only the revealed limbs have to become wet, and therefore the whole pasuk v'chalash yiga be'azav is written for this one detail. So that answers the question: what is the chiddush of pasuk Yud Aleph? And it introduces us to this idea that the Torah would write a pasuk for a chiddush. That if there's a chiddush in the pasuk, that we understand why the pasuk is written. Rashi kommt aber zu unser Pasuk Sivov. Now Rashi comes to our Pasuk Yud Beis. Here too we can ask the same question. What is the Chiddush in this Pasuk? As a Kli ver Tomei durch Negias Azav, can we wissen, wie Mikol Shekem v'Kavachem von the Friedike Dinim. The fact that a Zav touches a Keli, it makes it Tomei, we could learn it in a Kavachem from previous Dinim. As an Odom ver Tomei Negias Azav, as a Zav is Metama Philip Mishkav Moshe. So the fact that a person could become Tomei through being touched by a Zav, the fact that a Zav could make something tummy through sitting on it or laying on it, etc., for sure, it could make something tummy through touching it. So if it says in our pasuk, "You klicheres ashiyiga by a Zav," what's the chiddush? After Rashi Bavaran, so Rashi says like this: Yochel afilu naga b'me'achedov. V'bald as the pirish apasuk when yiga be'ez afilu me'achedov. Kem doch mefader sein as der chiddush besteht in dem was a Zav is metame b'negia a klicheres ich me'achedov v'kanal barucha. Since Rashi is looking for a chiddush, maybe the chiddush of this pasuk is that even though usually a zav is not metame, a klicheres is not metame me'achedov, maybe a zav could do it because we need a chiddush. The pasuk wouldn't be written if not for the chiddush. So we're looking for a chiddush. Maybe the chiddush is that a klicheres could become tamei me'achedov by a zav. Und es kein Kasher nicht, was in dem Siyum HaKasav v'chol Kliyetz isn't talking Chiddush. And we said earlier that if you say that Yigabay here means to touch, then what's the Chiddush of the end of the pasuk? Kliyetz. For sure, Kliyetz is tummy through touch. What's it telling us? Now that doesn't bother us anymore. Weil die gesagt ist, genug was the pasuk tut auf Chiddush din, nor in ein Prat. As ich ba Klicheres, is azav metam b'negiya me'achedov. Because we just established that if there's one chiddush in the pasuk, then the whole pasuk could be written even without a chiddush. It's all being written for the one. So this is what Rashi is suggesting. If we're looking for a chiddush, maybe the chiddush is that negiya is mitame by a zav when that a klicheres becomes tame through negiya by a zav. And the raya, not the raya to the conclusion that it can't be, that it's not Tomei b'negiya. This hava amina, that a zav could be metame b'negiya. To prove that, or to help prove that, Rashi brings, is Rashi Mesav Kidis V'teres Kernim. In other words, till now we thought Kidis V'teres Kernim is a proof to the conclusion. Now he says, the Kidis V'teres Kernim is a proof to the suggestion. That maybe the chiddush of this pasuk is that a zav is not metame, that a zav is metame klicheres through touching it. Kidis b'teras keyanim was dort selben take as mitzad der chumra von tuma zav is yeshmakim leimar as es metame klicheres me'achedov. Chach mes can es nit metame sein. In the Teras Kehanim, after the Teras Kehanim brings the Kal V'Chomer to prove that a Zav is not Matam B'Negiyah Me'acherav, the Kal V'Chomer is refuted, and the Teras Kehanim says that a Zav is more Chamor than a Mace, because a Zav is Matam Mishkav Moshe, and therefore it's possible that a Zav would be Matam through Negiyah, even though a Mace is not. Das heißt, das, was Rashi is mit Zayin zum Teras Kehanim, is nicht zu der Aschalas Hamshich, zum Limud as Azav, is nicht mit Tamach Licheres Me'acherav. Rashi is not referencing the original Kal V'Chomer that told us that Madach Mace is not Matama Me'acherav by a Klicheres. Kol Shekein Azav is not Matama. That's not what Rashi is referring to. Nor if I cared, to the Msium Tzveites Varan Hamshach Teras Kehanim. The Rashi is referring to the second suggestion in the Teras Kehanim that Azav is Chamor because it's Matama Mishkav Moshe, and maybe it's also Matama B'Negiyah. Ad Ubismichas Shveizu Magoi. Rashi says, look, in the Teras Kehanim until the words, or almost until the words, Ezu Magoi, which means Rashi is sending us to the second part of the Teras Kehanim, where it's just suggesting that a Zav should be Metame B'Negiyah Me'acherav, because a Zav has a stringency. As it says, Yeda Asvara, Yochel, as a Filo Noga Be'Mecherav Zol Zveren Tomei. High time is a druf no meram is durch v'chulu breakt das nit beferisch, and this is why Rashi is only not bringing it clearly, only suggesting it, because first of all it's a tasteless raya, it's not the main raya, but more importantly it's not the maskana, it's a yachal. I would think that maybe the chiddush of the pasuk is that a zav is metame through negiyah me'acherav. And if you need a taste of raya, look into Raskenim. Ultimately, we're not going to go that way. So therefore, Rashi doesn't feel the need to spell it all out because it's only a hava amina. But nevertheless, it still helps us prove this point that a person could think that the chiddush of the pasuk is that a zav is metama b'negiya me'achedav. So Adkan is Rashi's hava amina. Und der Hechelech has mekar azay nit lernen. But ultimately Rashi says, no, that's not the pshat in this pasuk. How do we know? It's from the Mesiyam Teras Kenim. That'll come from the end of the Teras Kenim, the very end. With the quote which the Teras Kenim says that it's talking about a touch that affects the whole keli, which is moving it. As we're going to explain in Siv Zayin, the Hasbara, what does Rashi actually learn from this Teras Kenim? The Hasbara in them. Here's the explanation. In addition to the fact that we suggested the whole pasuk is extra, which is why we would have thought that the chiddush of the pasuk is that a zav is metamet through negiya me'acheirav. So even after we establish that the pasuk is necessary, the words that the zav touches, that is totally extra. The pasuk comes behemshach zum Friedrich and pasuk bezagt v'chalas yiga be'azav. The pasuk is saying is following the previous pasuk, which began with the words anything that the zav touches. So the previous pasuk is talking about other kelim, so they have to go to the mikveh and to become toher. Then you could have just said ukli cheres yishaver. That if it's a kli cheres, it can't go to the mikveh because a kli cheres cannot be made toher. It has to be broken. To say again ukli cheres asher yiga be'azav seems very repetitive to the previous pasuk. Similar to in the end of the pasuk, it says anything that's made of wood should be rinsed in water, immersed in water. When it's stated in the it's asher yiga be'azav. If that the zav touches, yishatif amayim, because we know that we're talking about something that's touched by a zav. So the question is that the words asher yiga be'azav in our pasuk seem totally superfluous. Is it even mistaber to sagen? Therefore, we must say, as the chiddush in the pasuk liegt in die Werte, that if we're looking for a chiddush, the chiddush is going to be in these very words in Yigabay. That the fact that the pasuk rewrote these words for a chiddush, where is the chiddush going to be? It's going to be in the words Yigabay. Yigabay meida nayer efen in the gear. That yiga, it's a chiddush. Chiddush means something new. The Yigabay is going to be a new type of touching. Not like the touchings that were referred to earlier. Der Yiga is boy. This Yiga is it. And Negiya in the ganzer klolos hakeli, you're touching the entire overall keli. Not like a regular touch, which is in a very limited space, very limited part of the keli. And Rashi actually quotes, what kind of touch is it that affects the yiga boy, affects the entire keli? Through the moving it, the whole kli gets moved. But not so if you would learn that the chiddush here is the fact that the klicheres becomes tummy through touching it on the outside. Is the chiddush not the klicheres? Other than the word boy, aber nicht yiga boy zusammen. The words, the chiddush would either be in the fact that it's a klicheres or the fact that it says boy, but the fact that that's even on the outside, but yiga boy together means a new type of negiya, and a type of negiya that's boy that affects the entire keli, and that's Rashi's hechrich. So if you go back to the original Rashi, to the words of Rashi, Yochel afilu noga by me'acherav. You don't need any rayas for this. The fact that the pasuk seems to be an extra pasuk, this might make me think that even that the chiddush of this pasuk is even if you touch it from the outside, that even though klicheres is usually not matame through negiya, here it is matame through negiya. Look in the Teras Kenim, ezu magoy shukukulay, and what's the raya that it's not? Because you need magoy shukukulay. How do I know this? From the words yiga be'azav. Yiga boy is the dibra maschil. So the case that it says asher yiga boy hazav, yiga boy means it's a negiya sheukakulay, and therefore it has to mean that it's a different type of negiya, which is moving it, and therefore yiga boy hazav means moving it, not touching it. Now that we understand this Rashi, you look at the Rashi, and it seems like a complicated Rashi. This, there's a complicated Tumas Meis, the Mishkav Moshe, there's a Gzeira Shav in Teras Kehanim. Rashi doesn't mention it because it's not relevant to the Havana of the pasuk. The all we need to know is that the pasuk is a chiddush. We're looking for the chiddush. We thought the chiddush might be Negiya Me'acherav, but it can't be. Why? Because then the words Yiga B'Yazov are extra, and therefore the fact that there's Yiga B'Yazov means the chiddush of this pasuk is Hesed, Agiton. Now comes the Hira. A klicheres was wird gemacht von Opfer, as Miramis have mentioned, was Yisrael mi Opfer. The klicheres, which is made out of earth, symbolizes the human being, which was created from the earth. The person, the human being, was created from the earth. This is the statement that klicheres cannot become tamei from the outside, from the other side. Die Inyanim von Elam Haza was werden zugeklebt zum Guf Adam. Was der Guf seiner wird angerufen von Acherav, kann nicht mit Tame sein dem Etzem von Aiden. The parts of Elam Haza that stick on, that get caught on to the person's guf, the guf of the person is the Acherav, is the backside of the person, cannot make Tame, cannot defile the Etzem of the Yid. Since the Eibusha created the person in a way, that a person's body must depend on eating, drinking, and other worldly needs. And the Eibusha created in the nature that a person should enjoy these things. And the Aveda is not to break the guf by forcing yourself to not enjoy it. Baal Shem Tov teaches you have to bring the guf along. To use the person's guf and his chelke ba'elam to make a dira for Hashem. He said it's schuldig in them. He's not guilty. He's not at fault that worldly matters got caught onto him. Though he does have to cleanse himself from them, but the fact that it's still there does not make him, his etzem, impure. So let's not get too excited, because remember we're talking about a klicheres. If he's still, as the Eibusha created him, a klicheres, it comes from the earth, it represents bittul. If he thinks he's a wooden keli, and is bazichat zavakshne mitzis, he's a grown out entity, via eitz vasvaks, like a tree that grows, or he's a metal vessel, and his heart in zayn yeses v'matchis, his arrogance is so hard and strong, like metal. Is v'bal as it is shenit in dem tzir is beshafen geworden. Once he goes out of the form in which he was created, then he could become tamei even on the outside. So wooden kelim or metal kelim do become tamei me'acherav, because once you change the way the Eibusha created you and you lose that bittul, then there's no protection anymore. Fine. So this is the pshat that a klicheres generally, the halacha is klicheres namatay me'acherav, that a yid, even though a yid is involved in Elam Haza, it does not, and it's a zugeklept, and it sticks onto him, becomes part of him. Nevertheless, it does not defile his etzem. Then Rashi says, what about a tumazav? Maybe tumazav is different. We could think that a tuma like zav could be metame a yid, even if it's just coming from the guf. From the inyan ziva is nita inyan tivi v'dam nida. Ziva is not a natural event, not a natural occurrence like dam nida. Naracheli aguf. Dam merer v'yazdar zay mitzateva elam. It comes from an illness. It's an unhealthy discharge. There's more dam or more liquid than there should be, naturally speaking. So if we apply this to the person's aveda, dam nida is the Rabbi says dam mitzateva ba'am eaten ki yetzel levadim rabin urav. Dam nida in the spiritual refers to the ra that exists by the person naturally. The Eibusha created us with the Yetzer Hara, so the Yetzer Hara has a natural inclination to bad. Dam Ziva, he does as Megare Yitzrei Alav, Nochmer v'the Yetzirah is Mevalim Mitzad Atzmei. Dam Ziva refers to the Yetzirah inciting the person even more than the Yetzirah usually confuses him on his own. Ziva occurs, the Chinuch says, Ziva occurs when a person departs from the proper path and he engages too much in eating, etc., etc. So this is already a person that's too immersed in Elam Haza. So you could think, as in dem Fall, you could think that in this case, because he engaged too much in the world, the Yetzirah is too involved in his life, therefore that he could become Tameh, even Me'acherav. Because he's succumbing to an evil that is not necessary because of his nature. The whole reason we said that Avisar created a person with a nature. He has to eat, he has to drink, he has to be involved in other worldly matters, and he even has to enjoy it. So therefore, you can't blame the person for being involved in it, and therefore, he has to cleanse himself of it, but it doesn't make him tummy. But what happens if a person engages too much in Elam Hazeh and it becomes unhealthy from it? Maybe I would think that it is metama the person. Therefore, the Teres Kenim comes and Rashi tells us it's not true. If the touch of the Zav is a touch that's like affecting the whole Keli, it's touching the whole overall general person, then it could affect the entire person and it becomes Tameh even from the outside. But if it's just a touch, even if it's a Zav, it cannot affect the etzem of the Yid. As the Rambam paskins, even a Yid that has to be coerced to do a mitzvah is as the kriya nor mitzvah chitzenius. The coercion is only necessary because of the externalities of the person. Yitzri Yoshatokvei, his Yetzirah is overcoming him. Even then, when the Yetzirah is overwhelming him, he still wants to be a Yid, and he still wants to do all the mitzvahs. And the coercion is just revealing that. And through this coercion, it removes the dust that is covering up, concealing the person's real desire. The person's truth, Hashem's truth, becomes revealed to this world. As a Yitzhak, I want to be part of the Yidden. I want to do all the mitzvahs. So we see from this that the etzem geret a person wants to be connected to the Eibishter. The person wants to do the right things, and therefore, as long as it's not kikuloi, as long as it's not overwhelmed the whole person, which would be like Hesed, if it's just a negia and it's me'achayrav, it cannot make him tamei, because the etzem of a Yid is holy and pure. He wants to do all the mitzvahs. He wants to be part of the Yidden, part of the of Yiddishkeit, and he's saying reitzani, and therefore the etzem of a Yid can never become tamei.